So we've all seen something like that before, whether you're out in the grocery store, wherever you are, and you see a parent and a child, and the child is doing whatever they can to try to get their way, throwing a temper tantrum, or just being wild, if you will, and the parent is probably at their wit's end in life when it comes to their child, and they just give in no matter what. And look, I think we've all been there as parents. You can be tired. I know this week we weren't feeling well. There's another prayer request. Please continue to pray for us. We all caught the cold this week, and Sarah's currently going through it. She's the last of the four of us, but so I'm feeling better. The kids are feeling better, but Sarah's not. But when a child is throwing a temper tantrum to get their way, and the parent gives in to them, and really the parent gives no boundaries to their child. Just the child is basically, like I said, wild, doing whatever they want to get what they want. That then leads to them growing up and becoming what people call rebellious and disrespectful, things like that. And I'm sure we've all seen on Facebook or wherever people say, well, when I was a kid, I used to get a whooping for stuff like that or something like that, right? And and they would say, it's because parents are no longer strict disciplinarians like that. That's why there's a correlation to kids becoming disrespectful and kids becoming rebellious. There might be some truth to that. There might be some negative truth in there. Actually, I guess what they would say is our phrase for today, that if you spare the rod, then you spoil the child. What that means is, and because obviously we don't really use this language, to spare the rod is to not use discipline. So it's referring to a rod, probably in relation to farming animals and trying to get animals to go in certain directions. You would have a rod that you would use to guide them, and if they weren't going the way you wanted to, you might even hit them, right? So there's a certain physical discipline nature to what is being implied here. Of sparing the rod means to not physically discipline your children, or to not aggressively discipline your children, is going to end up spoiling them. And by spoiling, I think means, basically ruining them so that they don't grow up disciplined, they don't grow up with respect for others, and they grow up rebellious and disrespectful and wild in that way. So I think that's what people mean when they say, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And there are a lot of Christians who would say that and believe that and teach that. I know that when I was a newer Christian, I would read books by somebody named James Dobson. Has anyone ever heard of James Dobson? And then, of course, John MacArthur was a favorite preacher of mine when I first got committed to Jesus and was really interested in the Bible. And I think John MacArthur has lots of great things to say, but at the same time, he also advocates for, as does James Dobson, very strict biblical style, as they would say, discipline for your children to really show that you are the parent, they are the child, and there's a real distinction there, and the child needs to be subservient to the parent. Okay, let's see that. Let's see if that's in the Bible. That's what this series is about. Is this phrase or is this idea in the Bible? Where is that in the Bible? Well, I've already let you know in previous weeks that none of these phrases are, as they are stated on the screen, are not actually in the Bible. So there is no verse that says, spare the rod, spoil the child. But there are at least two verses in the book of Proverbs that do say something pretty similar. And we can look at them now. We can unpack these a little bit. For the first one is Proverbs 13, verse 24. Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. And those who love their children will not spare the rod. They will care enough to discipline them. So I guess what is being said here is, if you really love your children, then you will not withhold physical discipline. You will discipline them, because in fact, that is something that is going to allow them to become people who are respectful and behave well. So that's why the next couple of verses we'll look at in Proverbs chapter 23. It says, don't fail to discipline your children. The rod of punishment won't kill them, So physical discipline may well save them from death. So again, I think what the Proverbs writer is saying here is physical discipline is unpleasant for the child. I think we can all agree with that, those of us who have been physically disciplined, or if you've done it yourself to your child, then yeah, it is unpleasant for the child. But what does it do? It corrects their behavior, and according to this, it gives them the ability to go down the path that won't lead to death, but will lead to, again, proper behavior that leads to life, which is obeying God and doing the right thing. Now, you can think of it this way. If you discipline your children, what the book of Proverbs is saying, if you discipline your children, you're actually showing love to them because, again, you're helping them. Maybe not in the moment. They might not think that you're helping them in the moment, but you're ultimately helping them, right? And you're helping them to avoid death, both death and destruction that they might bring to themselves. So you're helping them to maybe not get addicted to drugs later in life and go down that path or whatever it might be. So you're helping them in that way. But from a very ancient Bible perspective, you're also helping them to avoid death at your own hands. Because look what it says in Deuteronomy 21. Have you ever, this is morbid, this is dark, what's dark humor? It's humor that only some people find funny, and it's sort of like, I'll go there though. Have you ever wanted to kill your kids? That's kind of what this is about. Look, I'm gonna read these verses here in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 21, and then I'm just gonna let the discomfort sit. At least I hope and I think it will be discomforting. Because it says, suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious child, son, who will not obey his father or mother, even though they discipline him. The parents must then go to the elders, it says, and say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious, and he refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard. So then all of the men of his town must stone him to death, the son. So let me just, again, paint this picture. This isn't, I don't think, talking about children, because I don't know of too many children who are gluttons and drunkards. But, so this is talking about a teenage or older child who for some reason is still in the parents' home, not obeying the parents to any degree, and is wild in their behavior, causing shame to come upon the home, and so on. They try to discipline him, and nothing's working. So what are you to do? Well, in the theocratic culture of the nation of Israel, the way it was mapped out here in the Torah, you were supposed to take your son or your child and bring them to the court. When it says the elders, it's talking about like a court. Bring them to some judges and bring the matter before them, and you're supposed to provide witnesses and make a case. And if that person is convicted, then that person would be put to death. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think that that's something that we should adopt here in Canada or adopt in our own lives in some way? It's in the Bible. It's biblical, right? It seems like that's what, don't spare the rod, right? Because it's just going to lead them to death. So maybe you should. And guess what this passage is even saying? It's actually admitting that sometimes the rod, discipline, doesn't even work, because you can discipline your child and they still will be rebellious. So, yeah, the Bible is saying here that one ultimate way to deal with unrepentant children or wild and rebellious children is to bring them to court and to get them convicted and to put them to death. This is about as far opposite from our culture and our sensibilities as you could possibly be, right? This sounds more like, and let's just be blunt, this sounds more like what they do in Muslim countries, right? It seems a very barbaric, ancient way of dealing with things. So is this really the best way to deal with children? Is this spare the rod, spoil the child, and you know what? Even do this if you have to. All right. What else does the Bible say? Thank God, the Bible has more to say about parenting than just this. In fact, this passage that we just looked at and this whole idea of physical discipline seemingly being advocated here in the Bible, this is actually one of those topics that forces us to be mature about how we deal with the Bible. I know we say, I'm sure we've all heard, or I may have even said, just give somebody the Bible and just tell them to read it, right? Okay, that's good, because I'm sure they will come across something that will speak to them and help them in their lives and bring them towards God. But honestly, the Bible is a lot more complex than that. The Bible is not just a straightforward instruction manual for everyday life, for how we live our lives. Some of it is, some of it isn't, right? And we have to be really careful about what we look at and what we literally apply in our lives and what things we sort of understand in context. So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to make a contrast by presenting to you what Paul said, the Apostle Paul said in Ephesians. He said, fathers, so parents, he's speaking to fathers, but of course parents, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them, but rather bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. This to me is the perfect encapsulation of what I think we should be doing as parents and how godly people can parent their children to become godly people themselves. On the one hand, you don't do anything that will provoke them to anger, and on the other hand, you instruct them and guide them and discipline them in the instruction of the Lord. Now that seems a lot different than physical discipline and ultimately putting them to death if they are rebellious. Let me just clarify. Even the Jewish people have never taken that commandment in the Torah seriously. According to the rabbis, they said there has never been in the history of Israel an actual case brought regarding the rebellious child, the rebellious son. Right? There's never been a case, maybe cases have been brought, but there's never been a conviction. I can be certain about that. So I think why that commandment is in the Torah, in the Bible, is to not think that is the right way to do it, but to show us that when it comes to sinful people, which is all of us, that is pretty much, if you get to that point, you have given up on God, right? Like that's reaching your complete limit as it relates to parenting. If you are at a point where your child is so rebellious that you're willing to bring them to court and have them put to death, I think you may have failed at some point as a parent, right? So that's really important for us to see that contrast. That is not what we want. That's not how we want to end up with our kids, so that they're so rebellious, they're so far gone that we want to get rid of them, literally. Instead, let's do what Paul was saying here. Let's put that back on the screen, Lynn, because I think it's important to see that fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by how you treat them. But how does it say? To bring them up, raise them. What do we mean by when we say raise our children? It's guidance, right? It's working with them. It's helping them. I don't know about you, but we don't come pre-programmed to know how to live life properly. Did any of you get pre-programmed? You guys perfect? Never made a mistake? Never did anything wrong? I didn't come pre-programmed, and I've had to learn and grow through God's help and wisdom over the years to know what it means to be a good person. And my parents had the ability to give me an example, but it's my responsibility as an individual to figure out what it means to do the right thing and to be a good person in that way. So I can then take what I've learned and I can take that attitude and apply that to how I parent my boys and how we parent our children. And look, if you're not a parent, you have young people in your life. You have even friends in your life that you can apply these principles to. So this message is for everybody, but especially for parents, because we know children are so malleable. They're so ready to be molded in one way or another, and we are going to be as parents, we're going to be their biggest influence, right? And so I think what Paul's saying here in this passage is, First of all, don't do anything that will provoke them to anger. And that doesn't mean that you'll never displease your children. I displease Timothy all the time. When he wants to go and do this, that'll be dangerous, and he'll go there, that it takes something that he might break, and I take it away from him. That displeases him. And that's just going to continue on as he grows older, as we give them boundaries, as we let them know that you can't literally do anything you want in life without consequences, right? So they're going to be displeased. But that's different from being angry, I think. I think anger, at least in this context, is resentment and hatred. Gritting your teeth and putting your fist up because your parent has treated you in such a way where you've been abused or you've been not treated properly, right? So don't provoke them to anger. Seems to me that sort of disqualifies or sort of takes off the table harsh physical discipline, because that does provide or produce resentment in children, right? Harsh physical discipline does produce resentment and hatred for parents. It lasts with you a long time, and sometimes you can only get through it through therapy. So instead, what is Paul saying here? Paul's actually not making this up. He's saying by instructing them and guiding them in the discipline of the Lord, he's actually just repeating what God said to do, or Moses said to do in the Torah, in the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Keep these words, these commandments, and put them on your heart. And then it says that we are supposed to repeat them again and again to our children. Right? That's the full Shema passage in Deuteronomy 6. And yes, repeat them verbally, but not just talk, but how you live your life, by your setting an example. So think of it this way. We treat our kids with compassion, with empathy. We try to understand where they're coming from, because they are little people, and they don't have the tools. Most of the time, I don't have the tools to deal with my emotions, let alone this little child who has never known any better, right? So even this week, as I was not feeling well, and I'm sort of the primary, when it comes to the mornings at least, I'm the primary caregiver for Timothy, the one who takes care of Timothy in the morning. And boy, I had no patience, because I was feeling sick and I was tired, and he has this new thing where instead of saying the word change, which he knows how to say change, when we're watching YouTube videos on TV, and he doesn't want to watch this video anymore, he can say change. He knows how to say change. But he has a new thing where he just goes, ah! He just screams. He just makes this sound, and it's so annoying. And I had no patience this week, and it was tough getting through it. But then I thought to myself, wait a second, he's not feeling well either. So maybe he has no patience either. And maybe that's why he, even though he knows how to say the word change, he went for the easier option of just yelling. So that helped me to get through it a little better. It was not perfectly. I'm not saying it solved everything, but it did help. We'll get through it together because I have a little empathy for him and that sort of thing. I would say that, and trying to model good behavior and trying to model God's ways, is infinitely. How much is infinite? Altogether, that's better than the rod style of physical discipline. Because physical discipline to me is simply just the easy way out. Yeah, you might get them to do what you want, but it hasn't really affected them in a positive way. In fact, again, it might affect them in a negative way. And if you have physically disciplined your children, look, just simply make that decision today to say, well, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, and I'm not going to do it anymore. And if your kids are grown, maybe you can even mention to them that, hey, I thought about it. We talked about it at church, and I thought about it. And I just want to say that probably wasn't the right thing, or however you feel about it. Just be honest with your children. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. All right, well, let's end the message with Jesus' approach, because we always want to go back to what Jesus said about parenting in this case. So what are we getting at? The better solution to parenting, rather than physical discipline or anything like that, is modeling God's ways, being like God. And that's basically what Jesus got at here, when he said, now, think about this. He's not talking about parenting, but he said that we are to love our enemies and pray for them. Pray for the people who persecute you, right? Not because they deserve it, and because they don't. Your enemies have probably done terrible things. People who persecute you are doing terrible things to you. But it's about what you do to them that matters here. Because if you do love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, then you will be like God. And as he said, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. Because I got news for you. Everybody has displeased God in some way, but he still loves us. He still cares for us, and he still gives, as he says in the passage, I didn't include it on the screen, but he gives rain to everyone, right? You got to remember, in that day, that meant a good thing for agriculture, right? Like, he gives us life, even the people who don't deserve it, which might even be all of us, actually. So God is good, and he gives us good things because he is good, not because we deserve it. So I think it's a pretty logical conclusion to say, if that's how we're supposed to treat evil people or enemies, well, obviously our children are supposed to be treated in that way. Don't mistreat your children, and don't provoke them to anger, right? Jesus said, parents, if your children ask you for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Of course not. So if you, who are sinful, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will our Heavenly Father, God, give good gifts to those who ask him? So God gives us the gift of having patience with us. Let's have Paul and Sean come up. We're going to sing Good, Good Father. God is patient with us. He allows us to grow in maturity. He is with us through hard times. You can just leave it on, Paul. It's all good. He cares for us. He loves us. He comforts us. He is our good, good Father. I don't know, as we sing this song, just take a moment to think about how good God is to us. And regardless of how our parents treated us, whether it was good or bad, or how you have treated your kids, forget about that for a second. Just think about how good God is. Keep your focus on that.